the air settles. Breathe slowly, and let the gentle, persistent rhythm of the following words guide your mind away from the quickness of the day. The world outside is receding, becoming a low, indistinct hum. Focus only on the quiet description, the extended moment, and the slow, steady progress of the story. Allow your body to sink heavily into the mattress, and your eyelids to grow heavy and warm. There is no rush here, only the soft, deliberate passage of time and the meticulously described details of a night that moves with the glacial pace of a deep, restful sleep. Let the story be the anchor that keeps you still, until the current of slumber washes you away entirely. The single electric lamp in the small room cast a tired amber light, a weak circle of warmth struggling against the vast, enveloping gloom of Aethelburg just outside the window. Elias Vance sat absolutely still at the sturdy, unmarked wooden table, the wood grain cool beneath his fingertips. He wasn't looking at the meticulously drawn schematic spread before him, the floor plan of the Argentum Vault, painstakingly acquired and verified, but rather at the way the dust motes danced and spun in the lamp's weak, golden beam. Each tiny particle seemed to have an eternity to complete its slow, lazy spiral, a microcosm of the deliberate pace Elias had imposed upon his life and, most critically, upon this night's planned work. The silence in the room was almost total, a profound and heavy quiet that settled over the ears like a blanket of thick, damp moss. Outside, the distant, muffled sound of a harbor buoy chimed a low, mournful note. It was a sound that seemed to travel not through the air, but through the very earth, a deep, resonant gong that faded into the pervasive quiet before the next one began its slow, inevitable journey. Elias listened to the pattern of the chimes. They were irregular, dependent on the subtle, almost imperceptible shifting of the tide in the Bay of Silverhaven, the district where the vault rested. Gong. A long, drawn-out silence. The soft hiss of his own slow, steady breath. Gong. Another deep pause, filled only by the internal rustle of his own thoughts. This natural, predictable yet unpredictable rhythm was the only clock he truly trusted. His gaze drifted to the thin, chipped teacup resting beside the papers. The tea, long since cold, had left a dark, stained ring on the porcelain. A faint, almost invisible wisp of steam had risen from it hours ago, a memory of warmth now completely gone, replaced by the cool reality of the night. He lifted the cup with a precise, unhurried motion, feeling the smooth, slightly gritty texture of the handle. He turned it slowly in his hand, observing the way the lamplight reflected off the curved surface, distorting the room's edges into a funhouse mirror of calm, protracted waiting. The act was unnecessary, a purely meditative motion, a way to occupy the mind without engaging it in anything that required speed or urgency. The entire night was to be a celebration of slowness. His mind began, for the 10th time, to walk the path inside the Argentum Vault. He began not at the entrance, but at the smallest, least important detail he knew. The specific, faint scent of mild disinfectant that lingered around the service elevator shaft. He imagined the way the air in that narrow space would feel, cool, slightly metallic, utterly still. He pictured the gray, utilitarian paneling, the way the light, when present, would be a sterile, harsh white, a color that discouraged quick movement and encouraged a sort of slow, cautious reverence for the structure. He could hear, in his mind's ear, the soft, barely audible click of the elevator button being pressed, not rushed, but with a deliberate, sustained pressure of the fingertip. The sound of the cable grinding high above would be minimal, a low, mechanical moan that was quickly absorbed by the thick, sound-dampening concrete of the building's core. He saw himself standing there, his own shadow long and distorted against the opposite wall, motionless, a silhouette of patience. This mental rehearsal was not to memorize the steps, he knew them by heart, but to imprint the pace and atmosphere of each moment onto his subconscious, ensuring that his body would move with the same unhurried, almost somnolent rhythm of the deep night. The small, leather-bound notebook beside the schematics lay open to a page filled with neat, looping handwriting. It wasn't a log of times or codes, but a list of sensory details. The faint, persistent smell of ozone from the backup generator. The way the carpet in the third-floor office absorbs all sound, creating a hollow, dead silence. The repetitive, slow swing of the maintenance door that has a slightly rusted hinge, making a soft, sustained dollar squeak creak dollar as it moves, a sound that must not be heard. He read the words, letting the description sink in, becoming the only reality. He closed his eyes. The blackness behind his eyelids was not empty, but filled with the low, slow-motion reel of his plan. The most crucial component of his strategy was the absence of haste. Haste introduced variables, amplified noise, and led to the quickening of the pulse, which was anathema to the kind of controlled, drawn-out precision required for his goal. He needed to be an extension of the building's own inherent slowness, a quiet shadow moving with the same indifferent, geological pace of time itself. He opened his eyes and looked down at the schematic again. His finger traced the path to the vault door. It wasn't a sudden line of movement, but a slow, hesitant glide across the paper, savoring the journey, not the destination. The distance on the paper was perhaps 3 inches, but in his mind, it was a long, protracted walk across a landscape of oppressive quiet. He felt the phantom pressure of his feet on the thick marble flooring of the main hall, imagining the faint, nearly imperceptible drag of the sole of his boot on the polished surface. Slight resistance, a sensation he would need to register and adapt to with the smallest, most controlled alteration of his slow, measured gait. The lamp began to hum, a very faint, almost musical vibration that had been drowned out by the silence, but now made itself known as his mind quieted further. It was a low, steady ee sound, a single, sustained note of electricity transforming into light. He focused on it, allowing its monotony to become a soothing drone. It was an artificial heartbeat in the room, a predictable, unwavering sound that anchored him to the present moment, a moment of deep, focused stillness before the transition. He lifted his gaze to the far wall. On it hung a simple, unadorned clock, its pendulum visible below the main body. The swing of the pendulum was slow, a hypnotic tick, followed by a drawn-out talk. The interval between the sounds was vast, an expansive silence that allowed the reverberation of the last sound to completely dissipate before the next one was generated. He watched the polished brass weight arc through the air, an elegant, lazy sweep. It was not a measure of time, but a visual representation of slowness itself. Tick. Wait. Wait for the air to be completely still. Tock. Wait again, letting the sound dissolve completely. He knew that Cora Hayes, waiting in the heavy, idling car 4 blocks away, would be experiencing a similar, protracted sense of time. She was the anchor point outside, and her role was also one of profound patience. She was instructed to only move slowly, to only speak in a low, almost whispered murmur if absolutely necessary, and to focus on the low, steady thrum of the car's engine, a rhythmic vibration meant to lull her into a state of relaxed vigilance. She was to be a statue of waiting, the counterpoint to his slow, deliberate motion inside. Elias shifted his weight slightly on the wooden chair. The sound was a minimal creak, a soft, almost regretted sound of old wood under pressure. He paused for a full minute, allowing the resonance of that small disturbance to be completely absorbed by the room's dense atmosphere. No sudden movements. No abrupt changes. The world was to be experienced as a series of slow, connected movements, like ink bleeding slowly into thick paper, with no clear, sharp boundaries between one moment and the next. He reached out and very slowly picked up the small, worn leather pouch that contained his tools. The leather was soft, supple, the result of years of careful handling. The sound the bag made as it was lifted was a whisper of friction against the wooden table, a light, dry shhh that quickly dissolved. He didn't open it. He simply held it, feeling the small, cold weights of the metal instruments within pressing against the thin leather. These tools were extensions of his own slow intent. Picks crafted to move with the utmost delicacy, tension wrenches designed to apply pressure in increments so minute they were barely measurable, a small stethoscope meant to capture the sound of tumblers with the quiet clarity of a shell held to the ear at the bottom of the sea. His entire being was slowing down, matching the speed of the night. The peripheral sounds of Aethelburg, the distant, high-pitched whine of a trolley, the faint, nearly inaudible cry of a night bird, were becoming less distinct, fading into the background hum of the world's sleep. His heartbeat felt heavy and slow, a deep, comforting thump, thump, that resonated in his chest, an internal metronome set to a languid, resting tempo. He stood up, finally. The movement was a deliberate, controlled rise, pushing himself slowly from the chair. No sudden leverage. The chair made no sound. He stood for a moment, letting his body adjust to the vertical position, feeling the faint, slow pull of gravity. He inhaled deeply, drawing the cool, still air into his lungs, holding it for a long, quiet moment, and then exhaling with a slow, sustained hush of air. He repeated this deliberate breathing pattern 3 times, a final, internal calibration. He looked around the room one last time. The schematics, the cold teacup, the rhythmic clock. All were frozen in a tableau of profound stillness. The light continued its soft, unwavering glow. Everything was exactly as it should be, slow, quiet, and absolutely controlled. The preparation was over. The journey of slowness was about to begin. He picked up his bag, and with a slow, almost reverent step, moved toward the door, entering the vast, encompassing silence of the street outside. The air outside the small hideaway was a heavy, cool blanket, saturated with the faint, persistent dampness that always clung to Aethelburg's Silverhaven district near the water. Elias moved along the quiet street with an unhurried, measured pace. Each step was deliberate, a slow placement of the foot, ensuring the sole met the pavement with a gentle, sustained pressure rather than an abrupt impact. The only sound was the faint, soft scuff of his heavy rubber sole on the gritty asphalt, a sound so minimal it was instantly absorbed by the thick, night air. He walked as if moving through a dense fluid, every motion resisted and therefore slowed. The streetlights, few and far between, cast elongated, watery pools of yellow-white light onto the street, illuminating patches of the slick, cobbled road surface. He walked through these pools slowly, observing the way his shadow stretched and contracted, a long, indistinct shape of movement, before being swallowed again by the greater, surrounding darkness. His mind was focused on the simple, repetitive act of walking. Left foot, right foot. Weight transfer. Balance. The slow, rhythmic contraction and release of muscles, a low-grade, physical lullaby. He passed a row of tall, dark brick buildings, their windows like empty eyes staring out into the night. Within one of these buildings, he could hear the faint, low clack of a boiler kicking on, a soft, internal machinery sound that provided a gentle counterpoint to the outer quiet. He paused, not in alarm, but in acknowledgement of the sound's existence, allowing its resonance to fade completely before resuming his slow, rhythmic march. This was the practice of presence, recognizing every sound, every sensation, without letting it accelerate the pace. His internal monologue was a series of slow, soothing affirmations, a verbal anchor against the temptation of speed. Slow. Everything is slow. The night is long. The objective is stillness. He repeated these phrases in his mind, letting the words roll over his thoughts like smooth, worn river stones. The repetitive mental chant created a monotone drone, a backdrop of calm against the sensory input of the physical world. After what felt like a vast, extended period of this slow walking, he reached the periphery of the vault's complex. The Argentum Vault was not a freestanding, imposing structure, but occupied the top 3 floors of a substantial, old financial tower. The exterior was a cool, pale granite, reflecting the faint ambient light with a cold, indifferent sheen. He looked up at the building. It rose into the muted sky like a heavy, rectangular monument to security and stasis. He moved into the alley that ran alongside the building. The air here was even colder, trapped between the high brick walls, and carried the specific, acrid scent of old oil and damp concrete. His pace became even more deliberate, the surfaces underfoot less predictable. He used the tips of his fingers to lightly brush the rough brick wall as he walked, a subtle way to maintain spatial awareness without relying on quick, sharp movements of the head. The sensation was a dry, scraping shushuasechich against the heavy fabric of his sleeve, barely a sound at all. Cora was waiting precisely where she had promised. Her vehicle, a dark, nondescript town car, was idling against the curb, its engine a low, distant thrum that blended perfectly with the overall quiet of the district. The tailpipe exhaled a thin, steady plume of white vapor into the cold air, a visual representation of the car's slow, constant breathing. Elias approached the driver's side window. He did not knock. He did not tap. He simply stood beside the window, his presence a silent query. After a long, measured moment, the electric window began its slow descent into the door panel. The motor made a soft, high-pitched whir that faded into the internal structure of the door. The pane of glass moved with the mechanical leisure of something old and well-maintained. Cora's face was dimly lit by the faint, diffused glow of the dashboard lights. Her expression was one of settled calm, her eyes heavy-lidded, already adjusted to the profound slowness of the night. Her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, her grip loose and relaxed. "Stillness," she murmured, her voice a low, breathy whisper that barely carried beyond the open window. It was the designated word, the single, one-syllable confirmation that all was quiet, all was as it should be. Elias replied with equal brevity, his voice resonating with the same low, deep register, a sound that was immediately absorbed by the night. Slow. He reached into the back seat and retrieved the small, lightweight metal ladder, designed to fold and unfold with absolute silence. The action was performed with excruciating care. The ladder was lifted slowly, the movement sustained and even, ensuring no metal pieces scraped or clanged against the car's interior. The only sound was the dry, gentle SCH of the fabric rubbing against the cool metal casing of the ladder as it was pulled free. He placed the ladder on the ground outside the car, not dropping it, but setting it down with a sustained, downward pressure of his fingertips. The point of contact was absolutely silent. He offered no further words of instruction, nor did Cora offer any questions. The plan was a shared internal map, and the conversation had occurred entirely in the language of slowness and stillness. He then moved to the exterior wall of the building, toward the service ventilation grate, a large, rectangular opening covered by a heavy metal grid, low to the ground. The key to the ascent was not speed, but the deliberate, protracted manipulation of metal on metal. He unfolded the ladder. This process was the slowest part of the operation so far. Each hinge was moved with a sustained, controlled force, the movement measured in minutes, not seconds. The sound was a low, slish 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 as the lubrication inside the joints resisted the movement, a sound that faded almost before it began. Once the ladder was extended, resting against the cold granite wall, Elias began to work on the ventilation grate. He used a thin, specialized wrench, its head wrapped in a layer of soft, dark cloth to dampen any potential metallic resonance. He applied pressure to the first bolt, turning it at a glacial pace. The metal resisted the initial turn with a faint, low groan, a sound that he allowed to dissipate for a full minute before continuing. The entire process of removing the 4 bolts became an exercise in extended patience. Each turn was infinitesimally small, followed by a long pause. He focused on the feel of the wrench in his hand, the subtle vibration of the thread disengaging, the minute shifts in tension. His breath remained slow and deep, his heart rate steady, a monument of biological calm in the face of mechanical resistance. The silence of the environment magnified the smallest sounds, yet his movements were so slow that the sounds they produced were too soft and too protracted to be recognized as noise. When the final bolt was removed, he did not simply pull the grate away. He maintained a sustained, upward pressure on the metal until it floated free of the opening. He then lowered it to the ground with the same exaggerated slowness. The point of contact with the asphalt was a soft, dull thud, a sound produced by the weight of the metal meeting the ground, but mitigated by the soft, rubberized edges of the grate's frame. He put the tools back in his pouch and began the ascent. The ladder was vertical, almost flush with the wall. Each handhold was a slow, sustained grip. Each foot placement was deliberate, ensuring the weight was settled entirely before the next limb moved. The pressure of his body against the rungs was steady, even. The ladder did not sway. It did not creak. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic hush of the air being displaced by his body's slow upward movement. He counted the floors by the changing pattern of the windows, a different texture of glass, a subtle shift in the color of the faint internal lights. This counting was not done quickly, but in a long, internal deliberation, a slow processing of visual data. 1. A long, quiet pause. 2. The slow inhalation of breath. 3. The sustained exhalation. He reached the level of the vault, the third floor, and paused at the top of the ladder. His eyes were now level with the thick, internal screen of the ventilation duct. He had ascended perhaps 40 feet, and the entire process had taken an extended, unhurried expanse of time. He felt the cold air rushing softly past the grate, a low, sustained whoosh of air being drawn slowly into the building's climate control system. This steady, non-threatening mechanical breath was the sound of the building's own slumber. Now, the slow work of gaining entry into the duct. He used a small, specialized pair of cutters to snip the screen's fine mesh wire. Again, the principle of maximum slowness was applied. Each snip was a protracted, sustained squeeze of the handles, the movement measured and controlled. The sound produced was a soft, dry snip, a sound like a small, sharp pair of scissors cutting heavy cloth, immediately followed by the minimal tink of the tiny piece of wire falling into the dark duct below. He performed this action repeatedly, the rhythmic, slow snip-tink, becoming a kind of slow, quiet metronome for the environment. The focus was entirely on the sensation of the wire yielding, the controlled release of tension in his hand. Time was stretching out, becoming a long, slow ribbon of repetitive, measured action. He cut a hole just large enough for his body to pass through, allowing the final pieces of the screen to drop with the same low, soft resonance. Elias slipped into the darkness of the ventilation duct. The cool, dry air rushed around him, and the metallic scent of dust and old filters was immediately present. He was now fully inside the building's silent shell, a slow, crawling shadow in the infrastructure's lungs. The next stage of the journey, the protracted crawl, was about to begin, deep within the slow, quiet heart of the Argentum Vault. The ventilation duct was a cramped, dark space, and Elias Vance began his slow, deliberate movement within its metallic confines. The floor of the duct was corrugated steel, and he moved by inching forward on his stomach, distributing his weight as evenly as possible. The friction of the heavy fabric of his clothes against the metal produced a low, sustained shhh, sound, a soft, dry whisper that traveled only a few feet before being absorbed by the surrounding insulation and the volume of the building. His movements were calculated to minimize any sudden shift in mass that might cause the ductwork to flex or groan. Each inch of progress was a conscious effort in slowness. He extended his arms, gripping the edges of the duct floor. He drew his legs up slowly, pushing forward with the balls of his feet, maintaining a low, even pressure. He then slid his body forward, a movement that took perhaps 30 seconds per foot. It was an exercise in protracted motion, a dedication to the principle of non-acceleration. The air around him was the only thing moving with speed, rushing past with a constant, low whoosh. His internal focus was entirely on the texture of the metal beneath him, and the minimal sound of his sustained friction. He imagined himself as a geological process, a slowly moving glacier of intent, pressing forward with relentless but imperceptible momentum. The heat from his body dissipated slowly into the surrounding metal, creating a faint, personal pocket of warmth in the cool, circulating air. After a protracted, long period of crawling, he reached the first junction, a wide, rectangular opening that led down into the ceiling plenum of the third floor. He paused, his body absolutely still, allowing the sound of the rushing air to be the only presence. He listened for any anomaly in the building's deep, ambient hum, the distant whir of a server rack, the low thrum of a distant fluorescent ballast, the almost inaudible click of a security camera slowly sweeping its arc. All sounds were steady, slow, and predictable. He lowered himself through the opening with extreme care. The movement was a slow, sustained descent, his fingers gripping the edges of the ductwork, his body weight supported and controlled. When his feet touched the acoustic ceiling tiles of the plenum, the contact was a soft, dull tap, a sound that instantly faded into the thick layer of insulation above. He hung there for a moment, suspended, his eyes adjusting to the deeper, less defined darkness of the ceiling space. The plenum was a maze of cables and conduits, a silent river of infrastructure running above the occupied space. He began to navigate this space, moving with a controlled, crouched walk, the weight of his body pressing gently onto the rigid metal framework that supported the ceiling tiles. He avoided stepping on the tiles themselves, knowing that any slight shift in pressure could cause a faint, dry creak of the plaster against the metal. The movement over the metal grid produced a faint, low squeak-creak sound, a minimal protest of the material under his weight. He allowed the sound to occur, but controlled its duration by maintaining the slow, sustained pressure and movement. If he rushed, the sound would be sharper, louder, and more abrupt. By moving slowly, the sound was stretched out, rendered as a low, continuous friction rather than a sudden disturbance. He moved, then paused. Listened. Moved again, slowly, deliberately. He reached the predetermined spot, the area directly above the main corridor that led to the executive offices and, more importantly, the vault's main antechamber. He had carefully identified the only ceiling panel that was not directly over a motion or heat sensor. He used a small, round suction cup with a thin metal handle, applying it to the center of the ceiling tile. The next action was a protracted study of sustained lift. He pulled up on the handle with a slow, even tension, a movement so gradual that it felt less like pulling and more like a gentle, ceaseless coaxing. The tile lifted slowly, the edges scraping against the surrounding grid with a soft, dry rasping sound. He held the tile in the air for a long, quiet moment, suspending the weight. He then moved the tile laterally, inch by inch, resting it on a stable section of the gridwork. The entire maneuver, from initial lift to final placement, took several minutes, an exercise in prolonged, smooth motion. He looked down through the resulting dark, square opening. Below was the outer corridor. It was vast, floored with polished, dark marble, and lined with heavy, embossed wooden paneling. The corridor was lit only by the emergency exit signs, which cast a faint, cold green glow along the floor, outlining the space in a watery, unsettling light. The air was absolutely motionless. The silence was profound, a vacuum that seemed to swallow all sound. He watched the slow, steady sweep of the two mounted security cameras, the only movement in the entire space. They moved with a programmed, glacial rhythm, panning from one end of the hallway to the other. Their motion was so slow that the faint, almost inaudible whir of their internal motors was barely perceptible, a continuous, low-level drone that became part of the room's ambient stillness. Elias began the slow, delicate process of descending from the plenum into the corridor. He fed his tools bag down first, lowering it with a long piece of soft, woven rope. The bag was lowered slowly, inch by inch. The rope slipped through his fingers with a soft, dry hiss, a sound like air escaping from a worn seal. When the bag reached the marble floor, the point of contact was absolutely silent, the sound of the bag's soft leather absorbing the impact completely. He then lowered himself, feet first, through the opening. The descent was a sustained, controlled drop, his weight supported by his hands on the metal grid. He eased his body down, his muscles tensed and controlled, his every movement a gentle release of pressure. His feet reached the marble floor, not with a thud or tap, but with a soft, sustained press, a soundless displacement of air. He stood for a long, quiet moment, allowing the heavy, oppressive silence of the corridor to settle around him. He was now fully exposed, but moving with the rhythm of the building's deepest, slowest slumber. He moved with the same, exaggerated pace toward the main access door that led to the antechamber of the Argentum Vault. Each step on the marble floor was a masterpiece of controlled motion. The foot was lifted slowly, then placed down with a sustained, light pressure, the body weight transferred in a gradual, flowing motion. The resulting sound was a mere shhh of the sole against the highly polished stone, a sound that died immediately. He reached the heavy, reinforced steel door, the first true barrier to the vault itself. It was a dense, imposing structure, painted a cool, institutional gray. There were no keyholes, only a recessed electronic card reader and a keypad, all dark and dormant in the standby mode. He placed his hand on the cold steel. The metal was smooth, utterly still. From his pouch, he extracted a small, finely crafted electronic bypass unit. The unit was enclosed in a rubberized shell to dampen any sound. He affixed it slowly to the access panel beside the door. The sound of the suction cups gripping the plastic panel was a low, slow squish, a sound like heavy, wet mud being gently pressed. He then activated the unit. The bypass unit began to emit a low, sustained hum, a very soft, deep vibration as it slowly began to cycle through the complex, randomized encryption sequence. This process was the second major segment of protracted waiting. Elias stood completely motionless beside the door, his head tilted slightly, listening to the almost inaudible hum of the machine. He was waiting for the single, soft, high-pitched ping that would signal the successful bypass, a sound that would cut through the corridor's thick silence like a single, quiet needle. The wait extended into a vast, empty stretch of time. He focused on the small, repeating pattern on the wooden paneling opposite him, allowing his mind to become completely absorbed by the minute details of the wood grain, the slow, lazy spiral of an ancient knot, the subtle variations in color, the way the faint green light caught the polished surface. He breathed slowly, in and out, allowing his body to become an extension of the corridor's deep stillness, a statue of absolute, patient calm, waiting for the gentle ping that would signal the door's slow, silent unlatching. The high-pitched ping from the bypass unit finally arrived, not as a sharp, sudden alert, but as a soft, sustained note that slowly faded into the dense quiet of the corridor. Elias immediately moved to the steel door, his actions slow, controlled, and devoid of any rush. The door's heavy electronic locking bolts had retracted with an almost imperceptible thump hush of pneumatic pressure being released, a sound swallowed quickly by the metal casing. He placed his hand on the door's cool surface, applying a slow, sustained pressure. He did not pull quickly. Instead, he pushed the heavy door on its well-oiled hinges with a steady, gradual force. The movement was measured in degrees, not feet. The door began to swing inward with a silent, languid grace. The hinges, designed for massive weight, were perfectly quiet, allowing the door to open into the next chamber with the same slow, inevitable pace of a pendulum swing. Elias stepped across the threshold, allowing the heavy door to settle back into its frame with the same controlled slowness, ensuring there was no sudden clank or thud upon recontact. He was now in the main antechamber of the Argentum Vault. This room was smaller, more confined, and filled with a low, deep, rhythmic sound, the internal pulse of the vault itself. The room was dominated by the primary safe door, a truly massive circular shield of polished, mirror-like steel, set into a thick, concrete frame. The steel reflected the faint emergency lights from the hallway outside, creating a distorted, funhouse mirror image of the otherwise dark and quiet room. The rhythmic sound was the low thump hump of the air conditioning unit inside the safe room, circulating the air to maintain the perfect, constant humidity and temperature necessary to preserve the documents and artifacts within. The sound was not loud, but it was persistent, a deep, steady bass note that vibrated through the floor and up into the soles of his boots. Thump hump. Thump hump. It was a mechanical heartbeat, and Elias immediately synchronized his slow, deep breathing to its rhythm. He approached the massive door. It was the centerpiece of the entire operation, the object of his extended patience and meticulous planning. He ran his hand over the cool, smooth surface of the steel, feeling the slight vibration from the internal air conditioning unit. The sheer, overwhelming mass of the door was a physical manifestation of time and security, a barrier designed to slow down any attempt to breach it into an exercise of days, not hours. He knelt slowly before the large, central locking mechanism. His movement was a controlled descent, his knees meeting the thick, soft carpet of the antechamber with a gentle squish that was immediately absorbed. He placed his tools pouch on the carpet beside him. From the pouch, he retrieved his specialized auditory equipment, a high-gain, contact microphone and a set of heavy, noise-canceling headphones. He affixed the contact microphone to the outer casing of the safe door, ensuring the connection was firm but not forced. The sound of the adhesive pad attaching to the smooth steel was a slight, soft suck of air pressure, nothing more. He then settled the headphones over his ears. Immediately, the outside world of ambient sound was replaced by a profound, internal silence, a complete nullification of all but the most intimate vibrations. The rhythmic thump-hump of the air conditioning unit, however, was now a loud, overwhelming presence, resonating deep in his eardrums. He allowed this sound to wash over him, letting its mechanical rhythm override any sense of urgency. He adjusted the controls on the small amplifier box connected to the microphone, slowly decreasing the sensitivity until the rhythmic thump-hump was reduced to a low, sustained whumph, whumph, a comfortable, deep drone, the auditory equivalent of a persistent, low fog horn in the distance. This was the bass rhythm of the room, and the canvas against which he would now listen for the micro-sounds of the tumblers. He placed his hands on the combination dial. The dial was a heavy piece of finely machined brass, cool to the touch. He began to turn it, his movements slow and deliberate, controlled by the muscles of his wrist and forearm, not his whole hand. The movement was not a spin, but a sustained, gradual rotation. The turning of the mechanism inside the door was completely silent at first, an exercise in friction reduction. His focus became entirely internal, centered on the minute, almost non-existent sounds being amplified by the contact microphone. He listened for the soft, dry snick of the first wheel catching the fence, the almost imperceptible resistance of the internal mechanics. He turned the dial slowly past the first number. The movement itself was a long, protracted moment of physical action, stretched out over many seconds. Thump-hump whumph. Thump-hump whumph. The rhythmic breathing of the air conditioner provided the beat. He turned the dial back, passing the 0 point, feeling the slight, sustained pressure of the brass against his fingertips. His inner world was one of intense, but slow motion, concentration. Every micro-adjustment of the dial was a commitment, a deliberate decision. If he turned too fast, the momentum would carry the wheel past the correct position, forcing him to start the entire, lengthy sequence over. Slowness was the only guarantee of accuracy. He found the initial point of resistance, the faint, dry scratch that signaled the movement of the first wheel. He was not looking for a loud clack, but the sound of metal friction, the whisper of brass on brass. He inched the dial forward, millimeter by millimeter, listening to the changing texture of the sound, the faint scrrsh of the wheel settling into its gait. The entire process of finding the first number took an extended, quiet period of time. He was not racing against the clock, but against the sheer complexity of the lock. He allowed the rhythm of the air conditioning unit to dictate the rhythm of his breathing, which in turn dictated the rhythm of his hands. Breathe in, turn slowly. Breathe out, maintain pressure. Finally, the first tumbler clicked into place. The sound was not a sharp, final clack, but a soft, high-pitched, sustained tying, a sound like a tiny, perfectly tuned bell, instantly amplified and isolated within the headphones. He froze, letting the sound resonate, allowing the success of the first stage to settle into the quiet of the room. He repeated the process, turning the dial with the same sustained, unhurried slowness for the second number. The sound of the first wheel was now a guide, a baseline of successful engagement. The effort was immense, yet completely contained and controlled. He was deep within the quiet, rhythmic pulse of the safe room, a shadow moving with the same indifferent, protracted pace as the enormous clock on the bank manager's wall, ticking off moments not in seconds, but in long, meaningful silences between the sounds. The rhythmic whumph, whumph, continued, a deep, steady bass drum for his slow, focused work. The rhythmic whumph, whumph, of the air circulation continued its deep, comforting throb inside the sound-canceling headphones, providing the only constant in Elias's auditory world. He had successfully engaged the second tumbler, the sound a slightly deeper, more satisfying ting than the first, a sound that quickly dissolved into the background rhythm. Now, he began the long, protracted process of the third number. His contemplation of the lock was a slow meditation on the relationship between minimal sound and maximum precision. The safe door was designed not just to be physically impenetrable, but to be an auditory trap. Any sudden movement, any abrupt turning, would send a clear, sharp clack of metal against metal that would reverberate through the contact microphone like a thunderclap, instantly signaling a critical error and forcing him to backtrack through the lengthy sequence of numbers. His commitment to slowness was the only thing that transformed the lock from a trap into a cooperative mechanism. He began the slow rotation for the third number. He turned the heavy brass dial with an exaggerated, sustained effort, his wrist moving only a millimeter at a time, followed by a long, quiet pause to listen. He focused his entire consciousness on the minute pressure of the dial against his fingertips, the sensation of the cold, smooth metal. The tactile feedback was as important as the auditory input. His mind drifted momentarily to the concept of time inside the vault. Outside, the clock was still ticking its regular, indifferent seconds. Inside, for Elias, time had stretched out into a long, elastic moment, each second expanded into a quiet, focused eternity of slow movement and listening. He was not moving through time quickly, but expanding the moment he occupied, filling it with the deliberate, extended process of his work. The rhythmic whumph, whumph, of the air unit was hypnotic. He found himself almost drifting with the sound, his breathing slowing even further, matching the deep, mechanical rhythm. He had to exert a conscious, controlled mental effort to maintain the edge of focus required for the manipulation of the tumblers. The line between absolute calm and genuine sleep was fine, and he walked it with the steady, measured pace of his internal world. He began to search for the faint SCRRR of the third wheel engaging. He turned, paused. turned again, paused longer. The resistance was subtle, different from the first two wheels, a dry, hesitant friction, a sound like a single grain of sand moving over glass. He was hunting for a whisper in a room of profound, sustained silence. He imagined the internal workings of the lock, the series of brass wheels, each with a narrow, precise gap, the gate. His dial was turning the drive cam, slowly pushing the gate of the third wheel into alignment with the fence. The engagement wasn't a violent collision, but a slow, gentle settlement. He applied pressure, not force. He was persuading the lock, not overpowering it. The sound came, a faint, sustained zzzzzzzzzt that slowly deepened into a clear, bright ting, a sound so small, yet so clear in the isolated world of the headphones. The third tumbler was set. He waited for a full minute, allowing the resonance of the sound to completely fade, confirming that the wheel was stable, not threatening to slip. 4 numbers remained. The complexity increased with each successive wheel, the need for sustained slowness becoming paramount. The smallest error now would necessitate a complete, time-consuming restart. He shifted his weight slowly, deliberately, ensuring his posture was comfortable for the long, continued exercise and stillness. His back was supported, his hands were steady. He was a statue of concentration. The fourth rotation began. Wumph, wumph. The rhythmic background provided the unchanging, steady environment. He moved the dial, his finger tracing the smooth curve of the brass, turning it past the number he knew was correct, then moving slowly back toward the required position. This movement, the slow return, was crucial for settling the slack in the lock's mechanism. He thought of Cora, sitting in the heavy car, 4 blocks away. Her vigil was one of pure, unmoving patience. She was instructed to count the slow, steady drip of condensate from the air conditioning unit onto the sidewalk, focusing on the simple, rhythmic plop, plop sound. Her role was the mirror image of his, a monument of stillness outside, allowing him the mental space for his controlled, slow motion inside. This shared commitment to slowness was the foundation of the entire plan. He found the 4th number. The sound was a slightly higher pitched, almost metallic SNNCK, a dry, definitive engagement. The sense of achievement was not a rush of adrenaline, but a deep, settled sense of quiet satisfaction, a small increment of progress in a vast, extended sea of time. He continued with the 5th, 6th, and 7th numbers, each turn a protracted, extended event. The repetition of the action, the slow turn, the long pause, the concentrated listening, became a powerful form of meditative repetition. The physical movement of his hands was secondary to the mental process of waiting, listening, and adjusting. The process itself was the goal, the slow, rhythmic expenditure of time that brought the objective closer with no sense of urgency. The 6th tumbler clicked with a long, drawn-out tightening, a sound that faded into the low, steady wumph of the air conditioning unit. He was now on the final number, the last barrier before the slow, heavy movement of the massive bolt mechanism. He paused for a full 5 minutes, allowing his mind to clear completely, his breath to settle to its absolute lowest, slowest rhythm. The rhythmic wumph, wumph, filled the silence. He was utterly relaxed, yet his focus was sharp, narrow, and entirely dedicated to the final rotation. This final movement had to be the slowest of all. The final engagement of the last wheel would allow the lever to move, releasing the main bolt sequence. Any sudden vibration at this point could cause a momentary misalignment, jamming the mechanism. He began the slow, sustained rotation for the final, 8th number. The rotation for the 8th and final number was the epitome of controlled slowness. Elias turned the heavy brass dial with an almost imperceptible movement, his entire focus consumed by the soundscape inside his headphones. The sustained whumph of the air conditioning unit was now the rhythm of his very consciousness, a deep, steady backdrop for the final, critical microsounds. He was past the number, now beginning the slow, painstaking return. The rotation was so gradual that his hands seemed to be glued to the dial, moving with the sluggishness of a hand on an ancient, underwater clock. He felt the subtle shift in pressure within the mechanism, the slight give of the internal components as the slack was taken up. This was the moment of most profound stillness, where the slightest twitch of the muscle, the smallest change in breathing, could alter the outcome. He listened for the final, softest snick, the whisper of the last tumbler settling. It was not a loud sound, but a definitive one, the sound of all 8 gears aligning perfectly after an extended, rhythmic dance of precision. He moved the dial forward, a millimeter, then paused. The sound was not yet right. He moved forward again, another minute distance. Pause. He thought of the concept of zero velocity, a point where movement is so slow it is almost indistinguishable from being still. He was attempting to move the dial at near zero velocity, allowing the delicate physics of the lock mechanism to operate without the interference of kinetic energy. The friction was minimized, the sound protracted and absorbed by the slowness of the action itself. The sound finally arrived, a soft, dry clink, not loud, but clear, followed by a slight, internal shhh of metal settling against its cradle. It was the sound of complete alignment. He held the dial motionless for a full 2 minutes, allowing the integrity of the locked position to be absolutely confirmed. With the final number set, the next stage was the operation of the bolt handle, a heavy, 4-spoked wheel set into the center of the massive door. He removed the headphones slowly, allowing the loud, persistent whumph of the air unit to return to the external world, now mitigated by the heavy carpet and walls. The sound felt distant, a deep, low drone of the building's security. He placed his hands on the large, brass handle. He did not pull it in a quick, decisive motion, which would cause the enormous bolts to retract with a loud kerchunk that would echo through the entire floor. Instead, he applied a slow, sustained pressure, an unhurried, constant force on the handle. The massive internal gears began to move with a profound, protracted slowness. The sound was not a sudden noise, but a low, deep, sustained gruin of heavy steel on heavy steel, a sound that lasted for a full 30 seconds, stretched out and flattened by the deliberate speed of his movement. The bolts, each as thick as a man's arm, slid back from their keepers with a slow, grinding friction, a sound so low in pitch and so protracted in duration that it sounded more like the sigh of the building's structure than an alarm. He held the handle until the movement was complete and the bolts were fully withdrawn, the groan finally fading into the rhythmic warmth of the air unit. He was now faced with the massive, circular door, unlatched but still closed, its tremendous weight resting against the inner seal. He applied his shoulder to the polished steel, his movement a slow, controlled push, a sustained application of force. The door began its ponderous, slow swing into the safe room. The hinges, now supporting the full weight of the vault door, began to emit a low, sustained sshhhhhh, the sound of oil being displaced in the hydraulic mechanism. It was a long, dry, heavy sound, like a giant sigh being released over a long period of time. The door finally came to rest against its internal stop, the contact made with a soft, dull thump, the sound immediately absorbed by the wall and carpet. Elias stood in the newly created opening, looking into the safe room. The room was bathed in a gentle, amber light from a single, low-powered lamp in the far corner, a light designed to minimize heat. The room was small, lined with rows of deep, gray steel shelving. On the shelves, resting on velvet pads, were the objects of his attention, a small, contained collection of ancient, priceless coins and two small, ornate boxes containing equally irreplaceable jewels. He entered the room with the same measured, slow step. The air inside was noticeably cooler, perfectly conditioned, carrying a faint, clean scent of ozone and metal. He walked slowly toward the shelves, his footsteps on the thick carpet completely silent, a ghost moving through a realm of profound stasis. He stood before the collection, and for a long, quiet moment, simply looked at the objects. He did not rush to touch them. He allowed the light, the cool air, and the deep, steady warmth of the air unit to completely fill his awareness. The success of the journey was not in the acquisition, but in the sustained execution of the plan's unwavering commitment to slowness. He reached out a hand, moving it slowly toward the nearest box, an antique, dark mahogany chest bound in silver. The movement was a gradual, deliberate approach, the hand a slow shadow. The only sound was the deep, rhythmic pulse of the ventilation, the steady warmth, that underscored his final, quiet movements in the heart of the vault. The extended period of stillness was nearing its necessary end. Elias Vance moved within the cool, amberlit confines of the safe room, his actions governed by the same exaggerated slowness that had brought him to this point. He was focused on the simple, repetitive movements of selection and placement, ensuring that no sudden shift in weight or material created an abrupt sound. He selected the target items with care, lifting the small, mahogany jewel box with a sustained, upward pressure. The sound of the box being lifted from the velvet pad was a soft, dry SCHF, a gentle, minimal friction immediately absorbed by the cool, still air. He placed the box into a specialized, soft-lined satchel, the material designed to cushion the contents and dampen any sound of contact. The placement was slow, the box lowered until the outer fabric of the satchel absorbed the weight completely, a soundless event. He moved on to the next object, a small, velvet-lined tray of ancient, silver coins. He did not scrape them up or pour them into the bag. Instead, he transferred the entire velvet tray, supporting the base with his fingers, lifting it with a slow, even motion. The only sound was the faint, dry creak of the heavy fabric of his gloves against the velvet, a barely audible SSH that faded instantly. The tray, too, was lowered into the satchel with a protracted, controlled movement. The entire process of collection took an extended, quiet period. It was a meditative sequence of reaching, lifting, and placing, each action stretched out over many seconds, allowing no space for quick, abrupt movements. The deep, rhythmic whumph of the air circulation remained the only constant, the metronome for the extended, quiet operation. With the collection complete, Elias stood still for a long moment, allowing the heavy silence of the vault to settle around him once more. The satchel, now containing the weight of the objects, rested heavily on his shoulder, a physical anchor. The weight was not a burden, but a confirmation of the sustained slowness required for the egress. He turned toward the massive, circular vault door. He began the slow, arduous process of closing it. He pushed the door with a slow, sustained force, using his shoulder and back muscles for a protracted movement. The door began to swing back into the frame, the hydraulic hinges groaning with the same low, deep, extended groan as before, the sound drawn out by the resistance of the oil. The entire closure was a long, continuous sound event, a massive, prolonged sigh of metal and pressure. He maintained the pressure until the door met the seal, the contact a soft, sustained press rather than a sharp clang. He then moved to the heavy, four-spoked handle, and began the slow, reverse operation, the re-engagement of the locking bolts. He turned the handle with the same protracted slowness, the internal gears moving with a low, grinding gruen hush that faded slowly into the rhythmic pulse of the air unit. The sound of the massive bolts sliding back into the keepers was completely attenuated by the slow speed of the movement, a deep, mechanical whisper. With the door secured and the lock engaged, Elias turned his attention to the outer door of the antechamber. He approached the door, his steps slow and deliberate on the thick carpet. He pushed the door open with a gentle, sustained pressure, allowing it to swing out into the dark, marble-floored corridor. The slow squeak hush of the well-oiled hinges was minimal, a sound that quickly dissolved. He stepped back into the corridor, carrying the weighted satchel, and allowed the heavy steel antechamber door to swing slowly shut. He guided the closure with his hand, ensuring the contact was a gentle thump hush of the steel meeting the frame, not a loud, sudden slam. The silence of the corridor, previously a vacuum, now felt heavier, weighted by the successful completion of the central task. He began the slow walk back down the corridor, retracing his steps. His gait was the same exaggerated, careful placement of the foot, the soft shhh of the rubber sole on the polished marble. The weight of the satchel forced a slight shift in his balance, requiring an even greater, more deliberate slowness in his motion to maintain the absolute silence of his steps. He moved like a shadow in slow motion, following the cold, green outlines of the emergency lights. He reached the opening in the ceiling, directly above where the tile had been replaced. He paused beneath it, placing the satchel on the floor with a gentle squish onto the carpet. He reached up, grasped the edge of the opening, and began the slow, quiet process of pulling himself back into the darkness of the ceiling plenum. The ascent was a reverse of the descent, a deliberate, slow upward pressure, his muscles tensed and controlled. The slight creak of the metal gridwork under his weight was protracted and low, a sound that faded into the darkness. He pulled himself through the opening and stood, crouched in the dark plenum, above the silent corridor. The next long, slow task, replacing the ceiling tile. He reached out and grasped the edge of the tile resting on the gridwork. He lifted it with a long, sustained tension, maneuvering it slowly back into the opening. The sound of the tiles settling into the frame was a soft, dry scrrr of plaster against metal, a sound so minimal it was lost in the vastness of the ceiling space. He ensured the placement was perfect, no gaps, no exposed edges, a flawless reversal of the entry. He retrieved the satchel and began the slow, crouched walk over the metal framework of the plenum. The rhythmic squeak creak of the metal under his weight became the new, slow metronome, a sound he controlled and minimized by the sustained slowness of his movements. He crawled back through the darkness, an elongated journey of minimal sound and maximum patience, moving toward the single, fixed point of the ventilation duct opening, a quiet shadow retreating into the infrastructure of the sleeping building. 4 blocks away from the Argentum Vault, Cora Hayes sat in the dark, idling town car, a statue of patient stillness. The engine's low, steady thrum was the anchor of her vigil, a persistent, low-frequency vibration that filled the cabin. She had been sitting motionless for what felt like an extended, geological age, her eyes heavy-lidded, adjusting her focus only on the smallest, most predictable external details. The humidity inside the car was high, a mixture of her slow, steady breath and the internal warmth of the idling engine. The faint scent of old leather and a subtle, metallic hint of oil from the engine compartment filled the air. She listened to the almost imperceptible sound of the condensation dripping from the car's undercarriage onto the slick asphalt. Plop, plop. The sound was soft, distant, and perfectly rhythmic, a liquid clock measuring the long night. Her instructions were absolute, stillness and sustained vigilance. She occupied her mind not with worry or anticipation, but with the sensory details of her immediate environment. She focused on the smooth, cool texture of the steering wheel beneath her loosely resting hands. She studied the way the faint, green glow of the dashboard clock, stuck at a single, precise moment in time, as per instructions, cast a diffuse, pale light across the dark leather of the interior. The waiting was an exercise in sustained, deep breathing. She inhaled slowly, drawing the humid air deep into her lungs, holding it for an extended count of 5, and then releasing it through her mouth with a slow, controlled hush. This repetitive breathing pattern lowered her heart rate, keeping her body in a state of relaxed readiness, far removed from the sharp, quick pace of adrenaline. Breathe in, hold, breathe out slowly. Outside, the only other sound was the long, low, distant gong of the harbor buoy, still sounding its irregular, mournful note, traveling through the vast, thick silence of the Silverhaven night. Gong. The sound would resonate, slowly fade, and then there would be a long, quiet interval of only the car's low thrum and the plop, plop of the condensate, before the next gong arrived, seemingly from a great distance. She recalled Elias's final instructions: pace is everything. No sound of haste. If you hear a rush, it is already too late. She had taken those words to heart, transforming the waiting into a commitment to internal slowness. She was the fixed point, the guarantee of an unhurried escape route. The side mirror of the car, slightly angled, reflected the faint, scattered light of a distant intersection. She focused on the slow, minimal movement of a single, stray leaf that had been caught in the gutter, being pushed along by a thin trickle of water. The leaf moved with a sluggish, reluctant pace, its journey a metaphor for the slow, inevitable movement of the night. She watched it drift, turn, and stop, a minute detail absorbing her total attention. She had her own equipment laid out on the passenger seat, a series of dark, soft blankets to cover the floor and seats, ensuring that when Elias arrived, the transfer of the satchel would be a completely silent event. The blankets were positioned with a protracted, gentle motion, unfolded slowly, their edges settled softly against the upholstery. A faint, high-pitched whine from a passing, distant police siren briefly cut through the quiet, but it was far away, moving in the opposite direction, quickly receding into the background hum of the sleeping city. Cora did not twitch. She did not tense. She simply noted the sound, allowed it to recede, and returned her focus to the steady plop, plop of the condensation. The long, agonizing period of waiting was not experienced as an ordeal, but as a sustained moment of absolute, necessary control. Her mind was emptied of all but the immediate sensory input, a slow, deep meditation. She was ready, not in the sense of being primed for action, but in the sense of being perfectly aligned with the slowness of the night. Finally, after what seemed like an entire night had passed, a slow, dark shape appeared at the end of the block. It was Elias. He was walking with the same exaggerated slowness, a measured, deliberate gait that made his progress seem almost hesitant. He was not running. He was not walking with speed. He was moving with the slow, controlled pace of a man walking into a deep fog. Cora did not move. She waited until he was directly beside the car. The only acknowledgement was the slow, sustained hush of her exhale, a silent confirmation of his arrival. His face, dimly lit by the distant street lamp, was calm, his expression one of profound stillness. The long, silent vigil was over, and the final, slow phase of the escape was about to begin, deep within the heavy, quiet atmosphere of Silverhaven. Elias Vance reached the car, his slow, deliberate pace never faltering. The satchel on his shoulder felt heavy, a comforting anchor of weight and success. He stood beside the driver's side window, his presence a quiet demand for the next slow action. Cora's response was a model of unhurried motion. She reached out and very slowly depressed the central locking button on the driver's side door. The internal mechanism engaged with a soft, minimal snick that was entirely absorbed by the car's interior. She then released the door latch with a slow, controlled movement, allowing the heavy door to be pushed outward by Elias's sustained, gentle pressure. Elias did not open the door quickly. He applied a steady, even pressure, allowing the door to swing open with a soft, gradual creak of the hinge, a sound that faded instantly into the low thrum of the engine. He slid into the passenger seat with the same, sustained slowness. The movement was a deliberate descent and slide, ensuring no sudden shift in weight or contact with the seat created an abrupt sound. The satchel was removed from his shoulder with a soft, dry show of fabric against fabric. He placed the satchel on the floor, directly onto the soft, sound-dampening blankets Cora had laid out. The contact was a soft, dull thud hush, the sound completely absorbed. He closed the car door with the same controlled slowness, guiding the frame until the latch clicked shut with a minimal, soft snick, avoiding the loud thunk of a quick closure. Inside the quiet cabin, their breathing was the only sound outside the persistent, low thrum of the engine. "Success," Elias murmured, his voice a low, deep whisper, a sound that barely vibrated the air in the car. Cora nodded slowly. Her action was a minimal shift of the head, a quiet acknowledgement. She did not press for details. The conversation had already occurred in the language of slowness and stillness. She began the slow, deliberate process of pulling away from the curb. Her hands moved slowly on the steering wheel. Her foot moved from the brake to the accelerator with a sustained, careful pressure. The car pulled away, not with a sudden lurch, but with a smooth, gradual acceleration, the tires gripping the asphalt with a soft, rolling hush. The escape was beginning, but the pace remained the same, unhurried, controlled, and deeply slow. The streets of Silverhaven were empty and deeply quiet, the air thick with a cold, damp fog that had begun to roll in from the harbor. The fog moved with the same slow, deliberate pace as the car, a white, enveloping curtain that muffled all sound and obscured all detail. The world was reduced to a small, isolated bubble of quiet motion. Cora drove slowly, maintaining a low, steady speed. The rhythmic swish-swish of the windshield wipers on the low setting became the new metronome, pushing the wet fog from the glass with a gentle, repetitive motion. The sound was soft, continuous, and soothingly monotonous. Elias leaned back in the seat, allowing his body to finally relax completely into the slow rhythm of the car. He closed his eyes, his mind focused only on the repeating sounds of the escape, the low thrum of the engine, the soft swish-swish of the wipers, and the distant, fading gong of the harbor buoy, receding into the deep, wet fog. He began the same slow, deep breathing pattern, inhaling for a sustained count, holding, and exhaling with a slow hush. The successful completion of the action did not lead to a rush of relief, but a deeper commitment to stillness, allowing the accumulated tension of the night to slowly dissipate, released with each long, steady exhale. The drive was an extended, quiet journey through the fog-bound streets of Aethelburg. Each turn was slow, deliberate, the movement of the steering wheel a gentle, sustained rotation. The car moved through the thick, white air like a slow boat on a still, black sea. Time, which had been stretched into a long, elastic moment in the vault, was now passing with a smooth, unhurried regularity, measured by the rhythmic sounds of the car's passage. The rhythmic, continuous thrum of the engine became a constant, low drone, a vibration that resonated deep in his chest. The swish-swish of the wipers was a comforting, predictable pattern. The world outside was a featureless, slow-moving painting of white and gray, devoid of any sharp edges or sudden movements. They drove for an extended period, the journey itself becoming a lulling, monotonous rhythm. The need for speed had vanished entirely, replaced by the greater need for a long, silent, and entirely unhurried disappearance into the enveloping safety of the vast night. Elias opened his eyes briefly, looking out at the thick, slow-moving fog. It was the perfect atmosphere for an escape predicated on slowness. The fog absorbed light, muffled sound, and reduced the perception of speed. He was moving, but the world around him was so slow that the movement felt almost stationary. He closed his eyes again, settling deeper into the soft upholstery. The sound of the engine, the wipers, and the deep, slow rhythm of his own breathing were the final, quiet elements of the long, unhurried night. The memory of the vault, the cold steel, and the rhythmic warmth of the air unit began to recede, replaced by the immediate, soothing rhythm of the car's retreat. The escape was not a sudden burst of freedom, but a slow, gradual drift into the deep, safe harbor of sleep. The journey continued, slow, quiet, and profoundly unhurried, a long, quiet passage into the heart of the deeply sleeping night.